welcome.
Thank you.
So it's Adriane.
Right? Adriane, yep.
I've been saying it for like the past 2 minutes, and I don't know why I said Adriane. So I apologize for that.
That's okay.
And how do you pronounce your last name?
Oh, it's Kruer. So I have a really long last name, but I just go by Kruer.
Okay. All right. Nice. And so what do you do?
I'm a clinical psychologist. I work in Los Angeles. So I'm here in my beautiful office in Silverlake. So I work primarily with kids and families, and then also adults with complicated family histories. So that's kind of what we do here.
So being on the East Coast, I think of where you are, you must get a lot of famous people.
You know, sometimes we do. Yeah.
So let me ask you about that. Would famous people be more likely to be out of pocket?
Oh, you know what? That's a good question. Sometimes yes, and sometimes no, right? I think it really just depends on the person.
Yeah. I always kind of wonder that. So do they use their insurance or do they just pay cash? Yeah. So what is it like being a therapist out there on the West Coast?
You know, I really like being a therapist here. I was actually in New York for a long time. I did a lot of my training in New York. I did my doctorate there and my master's there. So I kind of have a sense of both sides and what it's like. I really love Los Angeles because there's so many therapists that are doing such cool, creative, big idea stuff. So we all kind of have a nice community, and I love that. So that's my favorite part of being here.
And so what is it that makes you stand out amongst all the other therapists?
Oh, really good question. Well, I think we all have our specific niches, right? So I work, you know, a lot with adult kids or adult children of complicated families. So that might be, you know, abuse, neglect, things that have happened in the past that just weren't so great. And then I also have a specialty with kids and families. So I think, you know, that's a little bit different. And then everybody kind of has their specific area. And I actually have a group practice here, and we all work under this umbrella of complicated families. So kind of how that shows up later in life, right? Okay. So like problems in relationships, you know, problems, you know, with eating, that kind of thing. So it really, you know, is slightly different. And I think that's kind of what makes it such a nice community. We all have something slightly different.
Do you ever say to somebody, your life is not complicated enough, we'll refer you to somebody else?
You know, when I say complicated, I guess what I mean is like there's not quite a specific sort of description for it. So maybe people are feeling like, well, I know there was something, but I'm not quite sure what it was. And it's kind of subtle and emotional. And it can kind of be this sort of like emotional attachment stuff that happened early on. So we might not know what it is for a little while. And that's kind of what I mean by complicated. Okay. So yeah, if someone's pretty clear on what it is that they need, sure, I'll refer out. Yeah.
Right. So what made you want to be a psychologist?
Okay, so I actually started my whole career working in summer camps. So I was in grad school. I was in my undergrad, and I started working, you know, summers at a summer camp in New York City. And so I started my grad program, and then I, you know, realized, oh my gosh, I worked at this camp for 7 years. So I really loved being in a group dynamic, learning about child development, being around tons of kinds of kids and, you know, families and parents, and it was really dynamic. So I think, you know, from there, I just got really interested in this idea of emotional development and kind of how, you know, what makes kids successful, what, you know, what's getting in the way. And so I just kept going to school, I guess, to become a psychologist because I just knew there was more, you know, and there was just so much to know about. So I think it's always been so fascinating to me, like the development of people. So I've worked with people from 3 to 103. I also work in a geriatric setting sometimes. So it's just so interesting to see kind of what sticks with people along the whole spectrum, right, of 3 to 103. So I just think it's so interesting.
It is really interesting. I had an experience today that's probably not that interesting, but I had my first taste of a sugar-free Red Bull. And it brought me back to something in my childhood.
Oh. Right? Yeah, totally.
Right?
Exactly.
And it reminded me of like that pink penicillin you used to get in a bottle when you were a little kid.
Yeah, exactly. That sort of stuff.
So that might not be as complicated as some other stuff.
But yeah, exactly. Like we start to notice, oh, I feel this feeling and it kind of reminds me of this time. And that's what we do in therapy, right? Oh, okay. So this might have been something very familiar from a long time ago. Maybe I'm not experiencing this for the first time, right?
Yeah.
And what does that mean, right? It's
And
been
how
hanging
it starts unraveling other things. So then that brought me to when my cousin used to suck the orange stuff off the ibuprofen, right? So then that brought me to, right? So like after you start uncovering stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the narrative, right? And the story.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really interesting. And I just love, working with an older population too. I see like that they're still working out some of this stuff, right? From when they were like really little. And I like to be in that sort of, I love working with the sort of younger adults that are doing that work to kind of figure it out a little bit before, before they have their own family or before, they are having a hard time in relationships. So it's just a really, like you said, there's so much to get to know.
Yes.
And it can go, you can, get to know the story for a long time. So really great. I really like it.
So do you do a lot of testing? Because I know that it tends to be a lot of what a psychologist does, or at least the impression that's what psychologists do. Do you do a lot of testing?
I'm a clinical psychologist, so I work primarily clinically. I do some testing, but not in my private practice. So I do some neuropsych testing. I do some sort of screening in another setting. But in my private practice, I don't do a ton of testing. It's mostly clinical intervention, which is great. I love both, so it's a little bit of both.
So if you could not be a psychologist and you had like a different life, what would you be when you grew up?
I know, right? Well, I always wanted to travel.
Okay.
Like, get paid to travel. That was like my idea,
So like a Travelocity reviewer?
Maybe. I still have it in the back of my mind. I'm like, how can I, how do I integrate these, right? No, I really love to travel. I've always been really sort of in that space, and I really love all kinds of, what's the word? Yeah, international travel, just getting to know people all over the place. So
where's the most fun place you've traveled to?
Where's the most fun place I traveled to? So I did a lot of my undergrad abroad. So I have to say, I really loved living in Europe. I think it was just great. You're so central and you get to see so much.
Yes, yeah, it's so easy to get from one place to another too. Like, yeah. Exactly. So if you could give one piece of advice to somebody who might be thinking about seeing a psychologist and is hesitant, what would that piece of advice be?
I would say that just because you start in therapy doesn't mean that something's wrong with you. Just because you want to get going and like figure out what's going on emotionally doesn't mean that it is sort of like reinforcing those ideas that you are, some of that negative self-talk, right? So it's not always true. And so when we start with people in therapy that haven't been to therapy before, it can feel really scary because they're like, oh, maybe someone's going to judge me. Maybe kind of like I'm judging myself, right? Being critical of myself. And, that can come from this early childhood stuff, and it really isn't true. And so when people come to therapy and they realize, oh, it's just kind of more laid back, maybe a little bit more relaxed, and this person's going to be actually interested in me, it's a new experience. And I think that's the part that I really find most rewarding,
Yeah. And now what would be a piece of advice you would give to somebody who might want to grow up to be a psychologist?
Oh, okay. Well, I think, for me, it was just such a natural evolution. Like, I'm so interested in being around people and talking to people and getting to know what it's like for them. I think that was really, so formative. Just listening to other people's experiences, having that empathy piece really reinforced. And I also think it's just kind of, it can be a natural skill. So if people realize, oh, I'm really good at listening to people's stories or empathizing or reflecting, that can be kind of a place to start and a skill to hone that we don't always really think about maybe early on.
Nice. Yeah. So if anybody wanted to schedule an appointment with you, where could they find you?
So I'm online. My website is www.adrianekruer, KRUER, and there's an online scheduler there, so anybody can set up a phone appointment with me. We also have a website for the group practice. It's Echeveria Therapy, so ECHEVERIA therapy.com. And there's a bio for all of our clinicians, and they can sort of schedule an appointment with anybody to talk on the phone for a little bit and see if it's a good fit.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. And we can put those links underneath the video, so if anybody wants to connect with you, they could do so.
That would be great. Thank you so much. I totally appreciate meeting you. I love your energy. I really am glad I was able to be here.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, great. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.